You've spent more than 25 years thinking about autonomy. When you wrote this piece, did it feel like a prediction or a continuation?
I'd say it felt like the natural continuation of something that's been with me my whole professional life. I didn't just wake up one day and decide to write about AI and autonomy. I've been trying to remove toil from my own life, from my own company since I was, very young, just 10 years old, writing my first programs. The difference now is that the intelligence layer is finally mature enough to plug into the structural ideas I've been developing for decades. So when I wrote this blog post, it wasn't speculation. It was me finally saying, okay, the conditions are here, the structure's ready, the intelligence is arriving. Now we can talk about what actually happens when these two meet.
You've talked about building the digital body long before the digital brain. How does this 10-year effort shift connect to that?
Well, the digital body is the structure. It's visibility, preserved operational history, tools, accessories, utilities, and all the stuff that goes into those. Clearly defined goals, unified workflows. That's the digital body. The digital brain is the AI. So for most of my career, the brain just wasn't ready. It was something we talked about, we heard about, we waited for, but it wasn't ready. So I focused on building the body. And what this 10-year model shows is that machines can really only climb where there is structure. They don't invent structure out of thin air. So the ladder in this post is really just the body becoming more machine-readable over time. And once that happens, intelligence can start absorbing effort layer by layer. That's why I've always said structure precedes autonomy.
You've run your companies as living laboratories. What did you experience personally that made this shift feel inevitable?
Fatigue. That's the easiest way to say it. I've manager fatigue more specifically. I've watched smart, capable people burn enormous amounts of energy just checking on things, just getting status reports, checking if tasks are done, checking if someone responded, checking if priorities are aligned. It's invisible work. It doesn't show up on invoices, but it consumes you all the same, and you don't get anything out of it. So the moment we automated even very small pieces of that invisible work, the relief was immediate. I could feel it, they could feel it, and that's when it clicked for me. This really isn't about incremental productivity, it's about relocating vigilance, and once that moves, everything moves with it.
A lot of your childhood stories revolve around needing to understand why. How does that show up in this model?
As a kid, I couldn't play a game unless I understood the whole context of it. I needed all that context, logic, and structure to really understand the rules and understand what my incentives were, and that instinct never really has left. And I find that organizations are pretty much the same. So if you don't understand why you're doing something, why roles are defined the way they are, the history behind them, and why authority flows the way it does, it's really difficult to, I'd say it's impossible to autonomize. So this model is really just an extension of that childhood instinct that if work has structure, it can evolve, and if it's arbitrary and informal and undefined, it really can't.
The chart moves from 99% human effort to 95% machine effort. Why are you confident that direction is real?
Well, because the early achievements and early levels are already here. Analytical summaries, conditional triggers, rules enforcement, automated monitoring, that's not the future. It's happening right now inside of CompFu itself and many other products. So the question is not really whether machines will absorb human effort and take it over. The question is how far and how fast. And that depends entirely on how deliberately organizations prepare themselves structurally.
What exactly do you mean by effort?
Well, I'm talking about all the mental and physical energy that workers put into achieving company goals. That's basically it. It's working, executing, monitoring, escalating, coordinating, consulting, writing, thinking, analyzing, reconciling, reminding, deciding, all of it.
Why separate effort from jobs?
Well, the second people hear automation and autonomization, they think layoffs. But that's really not what this is about. I'm not modeling headcount. I'm modeling where the operational energy lives. And right now, humans carry almost all that effort, and machines assist, but they don't really own the loop.
Why does machine absorption follow a ladder?
Because machines can really only absorb structured work. They start with simple analysis, then they proceed to rule-based execution, then conditional supervision, then coordination across tasks, and eventually small teams, large teams. And each level kind of depends on, conquering the level below it. So you can't automate orchestration if your goals and your authority aren't clearly defined. So the ladder exists because structure has to come first.
What's a level 1 example today?
Level 1 is analytical. It's read-only intelligence. Nothing changes state, nothing moves automatically. The system simply gathers, summarizes, and surfaces signal. It just, a very practical example would be asking, hey, asking your agent, what did John work on in the last 3 hours, and getting some sort of a structured summary that pulls together data from his tasks, his communications, his time logs, workstation data. It removes a lot of friction. It's a huge entry point, but that would be the level 1. For decades, up until very recently, managers really had to achieve that level 1 by manually reconstructing that information by opening multiple different tools. But now a machine can assemble it instantly. It's small, but again, it's the first crack in the wall of machine-driven effort. And once you kind of feel that clarity, you really don't want to go back, and you can see where this goes.
Why do levels 2 and 3 create such immediate relief?
Levels 2 and 3. So, well, they remove remembering. So most managers don't realize, for example, how much of their cognitive load is just remembering to check something, remembering to follow up, remembering to enforce or escalate, various conditions that trigger certain actions. So level 2 is instruction based. You tell the system, pause this shift, and it executes it, cleanly. But level 3 is conditional. If this task isn't closed by 2 p.m., escalate it to such and such. So now the machine is watching conditions continuously and remembering all that for you. So that presents an enormous amount of relief for managers and supervisors and leaders, because the machine doesn't get tired, it doesn't forget, it doesn't drift. Humans at some point, can't carry any more micro loops in their head. And that mental space, when it's cleared up, frees you for more creativity, and you'll really feel that as a manager.
What is supervisory compression?
Yeah, supervisory compression is when the whole act of supervision just itself just kind of changes. So traditionally, supervision is very conversational. Hey, where are we on this? Can you send me an update? Did this get resolved? It's constant checking and nudging. And so when machines begin overseeing the life cycle of tasks, they will detect these blockers automatically and then escalate when drift and mission sprawl starts to appear. They notify the right people when things aren't happening on time. So the supervisor's job changes. So instead of manually observing everything, and they start to configure rules and intervene only when signal emerges from their AI assistant. That's compression. It's basically less noise, more signal, and a lot of the base level work is handled by the agent itself.
What changes in a manager's day once that happens?
Oh, everything changes. The entire day changes because instead of starting the morning trying to figure out where you're at, because it's surfaced. It's surfaced for you and itemized and listed out. So instead of scanning for problems, you're really just reading the most important signals. It moves the manager from reactive to architectural thinking. They start to define standards. They start to define escalation paths. They refine constraints. These are things that normally higher level workers do, but at some point even lower level workers are going to have to do. And it's a very different job than babysitting dashboards.
Why is cross-team coordination such a heavy drain?
Cross-team coordination is draining because of the amount of translation involved. Every team has its own tools and vocabulary and rhythms and priorities and methods and processes. And human managers often just have to become routers, which is a pretty unrewarding and unfulfilling experience. They just move information from one silo to another and make sure that they connect. They translate context and they look for inconsistencies and they help all sides kind of understand. That work is exhausting and it's invisible. It doesn't really show up as output, but it does consume an enormous amount of energy. So when machines start operating across goals and teams, they can detect these imbalances way earlier than any human manager can, and that's when they can start to move into orchestration.
Why is orchestration the inflection point in your model?
I'd say because orchestration is repetition is heavy, supervision is heavy, but cross-functional coordination or orchestration across departments is massive. That's where senior leadership burns a ton of energy. So when machines get inserted into that role and begin rebalancing workloads dynamically and helping to reallocate resources within specific defined constraints, that frees up an enormous amount of human energy and human capital throughout the organizations. And that's really when machine effort starts to numerically dominate as well. So the organization at this point will stop feeling like a chain of managers passing information upward and downward, and it will start behaving like an integrated biological system.
At the highest levels, what still remains firmly human?
Vision, ethics, culture, long horizon direction. Machines will be a part of all that, and they can operate and optimize within constraints, but humans will still define those constraints. So I don't believe in removing humans from the equation. I do believe in relocating them and retraining them. As machines absorb all of the mechanical coordination, humans will concentrate on stewardship, judgment, meaning, long-term direction, vision, impact. So it's a kind of elevation, not really an elimination.
You talk about decision acceleration. What does decision latency look like today?
Decision latency. That looks like meetings to me. That looks like meetings, waiting for weekly updates, chasing updates, being unable to make a decision because you don't have the information you need. It looks like, highly sequenced quarterly, budgeting. It looks like, finding mission drift and mission sprawl, weeks after it started, and then having to go back and fix something. Humans gather data, we discuss it, we interpret it, then we act, and that entire sequence creates a lag. But when machines, are continuously harvesting signal from noise, that recognition, it becomes real time, and that really dramatically accelerates decision making altogether.
How does structured operational history change that dynamic?
When all of your structural and organizational history is preserved cleanly and in some sort of a structured format, machines can detect patterns that we just simply can't. We all know this at this point in time. So most organizations treat their data as disposable in at least some situations. They accumulate logs and reports and dashboards, but we all know the difficulty of assembling all that data together and looking for insights. So everything eventually fades. But if you preserve your operational memory infrastructurally, it compounds because every cycle improves the next. Machines gain context. Decisions become informed by that continuity instead of just shallow snapshots, and you just have a deeper, more intricate web of context surrounding every single decision you make. So that changes everything.
What's the difference between data as exhaust and data as infrastructure?
That's a good question. I would say data as exhaust is a CSV you export occasionally and look at, or you have your somebody in your team analyze. It's there for reporting, and then it just disappears into some archive, some file folder. Data as infrastructure, obviously it's structured first of all. It's which means it has a form, a specific form. You know what it means. It's relational. It's queryable. You can ask questions. It's accessible in real time, and it retains those relationships and all that meaning that comes with it. So the difference is compounding. Exhaust just decays. It's just those files you have in your Google Drive, whereas infrastructure compounds your intelligence and your insights and accelerates your decision making.
Why will smaller organizations move faster up this ladder?
Yeah, this one is important. I like this one. It's simple. It's because they're lighter. They don't have decades of layered software and political reporting lines and informal workarounds embedded into their structure. They don't have all that. A smaller organization can, unify all their tools early. They can define roles early. They can define machine legible workflows from day one. They can choose one tool that consolidates all their data in one place, whereas you have a larger corporation where every department has a different set of tools. None of that data is preserved or cohesive. So that kind of freedom gives smaller organizations a structural agility that I think is going to matter more than scale over the next decade.
What slows large enterprises down?
Fragmentation, politics. The data lives in silos. Authority is sensitive. Informal processes fill the gaps between the formal systems. Every department does things differently. They all use different software. None of it speaks together. That's obviously silos. But even if leadership wants modernization, reconfiguring a massive enterprise is very risky and very expensive, and that sort of inertia slows down your progress tremendously, and many times even just makes it impossible.
Why can't companies skip awareness and alignment and jump straight to autonomization?
Um, well, yeah, that's a larger question, but um, awareness is when every human worker and asset in your organization is aware of every other human worker and asset. And if you don't have that awareness, you really can't bring them together into alignment. So, and if you can't bring them into alignment, you really can't autonomize. So, awareness and alignment are the structure, and you have to have structure before you can autonomize. Um, if your goals are unclear, your authority is ambiguous, machines can't fix that. They'll just add to the confusion. So, I guess in summary, awareness makes the organization visible to itself, and alignment ensures everything is moving in the right direction, in the same direction rather. Only then can you autonomize positively.
What happens when companies automate on top of fragmentation?
Well, they may get speed for a while, and they do. You'll see faster task completion, whatever task they've applied automation or AI or autonomization to, but ultimately it just exacerbates misalignment. There's going to be more drift, more confusion at scale because the data is all over the place. Autonomization without a unified structure is kind of like adding horsepower to a car with misaligned wheels. You do move faster, but it's not straight. It's going to do more damage to all of the, it's going to create a lot more friction on all the other components of the vehicle.
If someone wants to start tomorrow, what should they actually do?
Well, there's a lot of things that you have to do. First, you just have to commit. So you just have to commit to wanting autonomization for your organization. But once you do that, you really need to start by making your entire organization visible. You have to unify where all your work lives. You have to preserve all of that operational history. You don't need level 10 tomorrow, but you do need structural awareness. And without that, you won't be able to stabilize the higher levels.
10 years from now, what separates winners from experimenters?
Um, Winners will, no, they'll be around, first of all. The experimenters won't even be around in 10 years. The winners will have fully structured their organizations so all their data is consolidated in one place that they own. Their insights will be theirs. They'll compound. Decisions will accelerate continuously. Um, in 10 years, there won't be experimenters, I don't think. But, in the early years, the experimenters will add AI features to fragmented systems. They'll still have 10, 20, 30 vendors that control all their data. They might look modern in some ways, but most of the work will still be human driven. So the gap between those two types of organizations is not going to be subtle. I don't think experimenters are going to last long. I think in 10 years, anybody that's around, those are the organizations that successfully autonomized.